This kind of centers around the Johnson Flying Service, and Johnson Flying Service began in 1927 out there by the fairgrounds. And then they moved to a new airport out here, Missoula County Airport, in 1954. Then they sold out to Evergreen Aviation from McMinnville, Oregon in 1975, in December of 75. So they were out there a long time, and Bob Johnson was born in Canada when his parents were visiting up there, but they lived up in the Rattlesnake. Had a great big house, the whole part of family. And they had a brother, Dick, who served in World War I in Europe, and Bob served too, but they had an influenza epidemic at Fort Lewis, so he didn't get overseas. And Bob Johnson married a gal named Alvina Ludeman, known as Bubbles, because of her bubbling personality. They had a gas station and battery shop down on the corner of Main and what's now Ryman. It used to be Stevens. There's, I think, a Thai restaurant there now, Oriental restaurant. That's where he used to have his shop. Then he was given a ride by Dominic DeForo in 1923. He and his wife went up in a plane like this. They both sat in the front, and he gave him a real ride, looping, barrel rolls, and everything else. She was not too happy about it, but he was quite enthralled, and that really got him going in aviation. Then in 1927, Nick Mamer from Mamer Air Transport out of Spokane gave him flying lessons over there. In March of 1927, he came back flying the Swallow with Nick Mamer as a passenger. But that was a start there for Bob Johnson. They named the field Hale Field after Dick Hale, who was an engineer and a county surveyor, a good friend of Bob Johnson's. And then in September 14, 1929, Dick Hale went out to the airport, and they were exploding a lot of pyrotechnics, fireworks, and one was a percussion bomb. They set that off. It was at evening time. They ran out of the way, looked around, and the hangar was on fire. They got inside the hangar. This plane burnt up, and one that Dr. Phillips had there was a similar type of Swallow, and it was also destroyed. But that didn't destroy their friendship. He had two aircraft by that time. He had the Swallow and the Traveler 6000 called the May Gerard. He had 10 of these over the years, and 4 crashed, killed 2 pilots and a passenger. And a few of these are still flying that Johnson owned at one time. The Swallow, Bob Engel from up at Runan built this, but that's what the Johnson Swallow looked like, and the colors also. It's quite an aircraft.
What was the cruising speed on it?
Pardon?
What was the cruising speed on it?
Well, about 90, maximum. You can land at about 35. I had the good occasion to fly with Bob Johnson on several occasions. I was in the smoke jumpers beginning in 1950. One very memorable flight was in August of 1952. A Ranger was rolled on by a horse up there in the Bob Marshall area. We called it the South Fork Wilderness area. So we jumped out of a tri-motor. Bob had 10 of these, or 8 of these over the years. So it came in, 8 of us dropped in our special stretcher up in the Danahar area, or in the eastern part of the South Fork of the Flathead. The Ranger they got him pretty well bombed. He was really they gave him the whiskey and he couldn't even talk, but he didn't feel any pain. So we put him on the special stretcher and 10 miles down to the Basin Creek airstrip. And we never stopped when we were with the stretcher. We always chained everything. We just kept jogging right along. And Bob Johnson and Jim Dillon had set the tri-motor down in the edge of the trees, just a grass strip. So half the crew stayed behind, and I was given the job to make sure that the Ranger didn't fall out of the door of the tri-motor on takeoff. And old Bob took that plane. It had 2 flashlights at the end showing where the end of the strip was, the Forest Service flashlights, and half the crew stayed behind there. On takeoff, old Bob whipped that tri-motor up like that, and I was looking right straight down. And we got in Missoula about around 11:30, I guess it was. I had a date that night, but had to cancel that. But that was 1952. And the co-pilot, Jim Dillon, died the next year in 53 on a tri-motor south of Basin, below Helena. They got caught in a static line above a power line and wrapped around the nose and the tail, and they were trying to land by the highway, and the part on the tail wrapped around the telephone pole, pulled them down and killed them both. But That was the year 1953. Bob Johnson died in, let's see, it was December 1980 at the age of 87. But when he sold his business, he was 82 years of age. He'd been in a long time with the Johnson Flying Service. He had a lot of aircraft, the C-47 here, and we have one over the hangar, which is 24320. This is 49466, a sister ship. On July 12, 1950, I was making my first fire jump. And we were in a tri-motor, and we lost number 2 engine, the center one, over by Lowell Pass. Had to come back, and this one was, like this was warmed up, and we hopped into it, and off we went again. Then out by Grangeville, the Gospel Hump Wilderness area, we were dropping 2 at a time. There's a small lake down there, and Les Grenland and I were the last 2 out. I was the last one out of the aircraft. I looked at him once, everything was okay. The second time, he was right in front of me, and I ran into his lines, and my right foot got caught, and I was hanging head down from his lines. I couldn't quite get up to my knife, and his parachute was half collapsed, but he managed to climb up and cut me loose. So 10 seconds later, we slammed into the ground. I was 19 years of age at that time. That was quite an experience. But
neither one of you were hurt?
Pardon?
Neither one of you were hurt?
No, got bruised. But that was all. Luckily, there weren't any rocks or trees down below where we hit. He had a brother, Dick Johnson, too, who learned to fly later on. After Bob soloed in 1927, he started teaching his brother Dick how to fly. He'd been with the Bureau of Public Roads. In 1929, he soloed and quit the other operation and joined the Johnson Flying Service. And he married Kitty Gleason of Missoula. On September 3, 1938, he was flying a tri-motor, a big one, what they call a 5AT, air transport, a little bigger than this one. The downwind caught him at the Big Prairie airstrip over there in the Bob Marshall area. It slammed him in, one wing hit a tree, knocked it off, and he was quite seriously injured. But he was back flying again in about a month. But that was one of the first tri-motor that Bob Johnson owned. That was his first crash. And then on September 22, 1939, he was flying a Traveler, like this one over here, dropping cargo in the Roaring Lion Creek area, southwest of Hamilton. One wing caught a tree, they flipped it around, upside down, really made a mess of it, and he was knocked unconscious, and the cargo kicker got out. There happened to be some other people fighting fire in the area, and they managed to get Dick Johnson out of there. And about 2 weeks later, he was flying again. But then in March 2, 1945, he was flying Orange Olson and Bob Brown south of Jackson, Wyoming, in the Moose Creek Gray River country, and they were on a game count for elk. Again, bad wind, air, and a wing caught a tree and it flipped it, and this time Dick Johnson died along with Orange Olson, and Bob Brown survived. So 3 crashes from 1938 to 1945, and it was not the aircraft's fault, it was simply weather. And Bill Oder was from Missoula, and his parents had a tire shop where the Senior Citizen Center is now in South Higgins. And Bill became a pilot in the Army Air Force and flew about 50 missions on the P-47s. And he came back and he was assigned to the Air Force Base of Rapid City, later known as Ellsworth Air Force Base. He was flying B-25s like this one here. But the one he had a glass nose and had a co-pilot and an engineer with him. This was on November 27, 1945, after World War II. The parents, Reuben and Etta, were waiting here at the airport, the new airport. He never showed up. 2 days later, on November 29, they found the aircraft, and it was not too far from the ridge near Miller Peak. I've been up there before, and you can climb up about 200 feet up a slight incline and look right down and see the airport out here in Missoula. They came that close to making it.
So he crashed there?
Yeah, they crashed, and it was really a mess, they said. There was a lot of snow. That's why it took 2 days to find them. But Bill Yagi, a Johnson pilot, and Vic Solander, acting as spotter flying in a Traveler, found the wreckage. There's still some pieces up there, not much. And we have a prop out there that came from that wreckage, and we have one of the engines also over in our storage area. But that was really a sad situation. On that evening of November 27th, I was living at Pillsville by Bonner, and Jimmy Hintz and I were sophomores in high school. We heard the engines, and we knew all about these aircraft from World War II days. We knew it was a B-25 with the short stacks, and all of a sudden the sound disappeared. There was no sound of a crash. And the next day they said there was an airplane missing, a B-25, and Mrs. Fleming by Clinton had heard the crash. But they pinpointed that 2 days later. It was the plane that we heard but did not hear the crash. And Bill Yeagy went on to fly more after that time, and he was flying another one of the travelers over there by the old mining town of Dixie in the Nez Perce National Forest. And on February 21, he got sucked in by bad weather and slammed into the side of a canyon, and he died. And the cargo kicker, the crewman, survived, but that was another one of the traveler crashes. See, Bill Yeagy was 27 years old when he died in that crash. These C-47s, DC-3s are quite an aircraft. They made over 10,000 of them, and there's still about 1,000 flying today. The one we have is still flyable. It's being worked on the aileron, on the left aileron, but we hope to have it flying again by next summer. If you have any questions on anything on these four graves out there, are very close together, surprisingly. From here to the cars, well, half the distance to the parking lot to where those are all kind of gathered together.
For Dick Johnson and Bob Johnson and all?
Pardon?
For Dick Johnson and Bob Johnson?
And Bill Yeagy and Bill Oder, too. They're all right, just by accident, they're all in that. Of course, the two brothers are close, and Bob's wife's out there, Albina, so Bubbles.
It's right over here.
Yeah, it's down there by Sycamore, and you take the first road to the right from Sycamore, and that's where they're located. Going down towards Mulberry. I wish we'd had the good weather, because I had things I'd like to point out there, but it's impossible.
Yeah, you can't take your nice models up and get rained on.
Is there a reason that they have two names for the DC-3 and the C-47?
Well, they called them Goonie Birds and Dakotas. The British called them Dakotas. That's after the Douglas Aircraft Company name. They said Dakota.
No?
But a lot of them in the military called them Goonie Birds. They're really a good aircraft. They're really a solid aircraft. At times we were up there dropping cargo with the smoke jumpers, would be 50 feet off the deck in those ridges, that plane bouncing around, but they really were solid. Well, the one time in the Thompson River country, we had a big fire up there, and all of a sudden the plane started to vibrate. You know what that means. Ready to stall.
No, I suppose.
But he got the throttles forward before anything happened. A lot of experiences over the years on the smoke jumpers and aviation. But Bob Johnson had a contract with the Forest Service for a long time on smoke jumpers, flying cargo, and had quite a number of aircraft. I said on the trimotors they had 8, 5 crashed. They killed 4 pilots, 2 smoke jumpers, and a forest supervisor. 10 of the travelers, and 3 of them are still flying again. They've been restored. I made my first practice jump out of one of those travelers up 9 Mile. We had to camp up there, Camp Menard. It was a rainy day like this. We were behind schedule, and we jumped anyway on the rain. That was out of the old traveler. Well, good kind of worm. That's all I had, folks.
One last question. One of these big horses being transported, did they have a way to restrain the horses inside the fuselage of the aircraft?
You put them in the horses inside the aircraft?
Yeah.
Yes, they had actually, you say dope and put them out. And they put them in the trimotor, like they fly them over to Big Prairie, for example. But one guy rode along with a rifle in case they came to and tried kicking the airplane apart. Yeah, they sure did. The big trimotors, like the 5AT Air Transport, and they used to load them up here by Clearwater Crossing at the Boyd Ranch. That was the place where they loaded most of them up.
So they put drugs in the horses so the horses would be pacified for the flight.
That's right.
You just about have to, you know.
Yeah, makes sense, I guess.